Hello. Come in, do, and make yourselves at home. This is the History of Ideas podcast, where we tackle some of the biggest questions around. This week, we're wondering what makes me human. Enjoy the programme.
Nikki, hi.
Hello, Barry.
How was your weekend?
Busy, as usual. I spent a lot of time doing dancing and
Nice.
hot yoga and those sorts of things.
A remarkable thing about people is their ability to tell stories.
And then party last night. Everybody came over and we
Ask them how their weekend went, and they'll arrange a random series of events into an amusing story with a beginning, a middle, and an end.
Everybody's bright-eyed and sparkly, actually. Yeah, it's like a bunch of squirrels.
In asking what makes us human, we're asking what marks us out as different from other thinking animals. What gives us the kind of minds we have? And I think the key difference is language.
Wow, that's quite a spectacular sight.
Through language, we're able to speak our minds and share our thoughts with others. So language is not only distinctively human, it also plays a large part in how we use and express our humanity.
Now you see the culprit.
But if language is the thing that sets us apart, it has to be unique to humans. But I want to test that idea, starting by doing a little bird watching with Nicola Clayton.
Hello, boys and girls. You all right?
Nicola Clayton studies the cognition of crows and other corvids at the University of Cambridge. She's always been fascinated by birds. And walking round her aviary, it's equally obvious that the birds are fascinated by her.
That's the bowing or greeting display.
Wow, dozen rooks all on their branches, all looking at us.
So there's a number of calls that signify different things. For example, there's a contact call, food sharing call, there's alarm calls, different predator calls, calls for when they recognise people, when they don't, unfamiliar individuals.
I didn't realise there were so many variations. They really are specific vocalisations for particular social signals to one another.
That's our understanding of it, but it hasn't really been studied in great detail scientifically, interestingly. It's the same with the Eurasian jays. They're very quiet at the moment, but they're actually fantastic mimics. And in the breeding season, you'll hear them mimicking all kinds of sounds, like dripping tap, wolf whistles of when the builders were out here and say, I love you.
Amazing, amazing. So their vocalisation is as close to ours as you're likely to get. But would we really call that language?
Well, I wouldn't. For me, these are clearly communicative signals, but for it to be a language, you have to show that each sound actually communicates a meaning. Now, you could say to me, oh, well, those calls, surely that means predator above. But do you know that it actually refers to a meaning specifically, or is it a sound that triggers a behavioural response? If I were to bite into a lemon, you might get a kind of, sound of nasty acid lemon. That's a signal that's triggered a response. You wouldn't want to say that shows that there's a word lemon that refers to a fruit and a particular shade of yellow. And then, of course, human language has grammar to it. So if I say, I love you, it doesn't necessarily follow that you love me.
Because the world isn't fair.
Because the world isn't fair, precisely.
Clearly, birds can communicate in sophisticated ways, but not all communication is linguistic. We convey a lot by sighing or groaning, winking or waving, but language takes us way beyond that. Language produces an almost limitless expressive power to say and understand things we've never heard before. So birds don't have a language, but how about animals which are much more closely connected to us?
What Hamadryas baboons are able to do very nicely is to arrange which particular pub to meet up at lunchtime, in other words, watering hole.
Robin Dunbar from the University of Oxford is an expert on primates.
The males individually will make bids by going out in front of the group where it's sitting grooming, essentially pointing the direction they want to go. And then sometimes they'll get up and go back into the group, go up to another male, stare at him very closely in the face, and then spin round and have these very bright red bottoms, and then they waddle away with this very distinctive ballerina-like waddle and go back out to where they're doing. This is signalling, just watch where I want to go. I'm asking you to come and support my vote. And several males will be pointing different directions. And as soon as the majority goes one way, everybody just goes off.
So they're communicating very effectively.
Incredibly effectively at this, but in the end, it is not language. And it's very much limited to specific conditions, limited range of possibilities out there that everybody already has to know about.
And language frees us from those limitations.
The grammatical structure that language is built on really allows us to explain to somebody else what they might find if they went somewhere else. No monkey or ape could ever do that.
If it's only humans who have language, that's a pretty striking fact. And yet some people believe we can teach other animals language. They might point to the famous bonobo chimp Kanzi, who has been trained to use over 600 signs for words. But remember, human adults have on average about 60,000 words. And what's more, they combine them in highly precise ways to produce indefinitely many new sentences. But how are we able to do that? What we know from the study of language is that infants by about the age of 20 months manage to produce grammatical sentences with a structure that's common to all human languages. The study of that common structure is called universal grammar. For this idea, we must turn to the groundbreaking work of linguist Noam Chomsky.
What makes me human?
Noam Chomsky is an American linguist and psychologist and a key figure in the intellectual movement of the 1950s that gave rise to the modern cognitive sciences. He revolutionized the field of linguistics by suggesting that humans have an innate instinct for language structure. He also developed the idea of a universal grammar, arguing that human language is distinct from any other form of animal communication. He is also a media critic and political activist, identifying as a libertarian socialist.
What makes me human?
Chomsky's idea of a universal grammar suggests that despite their differences, all human languages share a common underlying form. What's more, we are biologically pre-programmed to acquire languages that conform to the universal principles of grammar. Here's Chomsky explaining what grammar enables us to do.
Suppose I say, John bought a dog for Mary to play with. Everyone knows that the subject is Mary and the object is dog. But how do we know that? Why doesn't it mean John bought a dog for the dog to play with Mary? Or why doesn't it mean John bought a dog for Mary for the dog to play with John? I mean, those are all perfectly intelligible meanings. Nevertheless, we know that it means Mary's playing with a dog. Now, that kind of knowledge is absolutely unattainable on the basis of inductive argument.
And no possibility that people could have learned how to decipher that sentence by having heard similar sentences.
Just imagine the kind of learning program that would be necessary to make these discriminations. We know for a fact that it can't be true. People never make mistakes about such things. These are just things that you know. Your language system works in such a way as to impose these interpretations without choice, without consciousness. It's just the way it works.
This is a controversial idea. Chomsky is saying that infants don't learn language by imitating the speech they're exposed to, nor merely by generalizing on the forms of the languages they hear. Instead, they come pre-prepared with a grammatical structure that organizes what they're exposed to, enables them to go well beyond what they've heard. They can do this, according to Chomsky, not because they were taught and not because they share social and cultural features. What they have in common is their brains, and language is part of that initial brain structure.
What makes me human?
So let's suppose that children already have this scaffolding that allows them to acquire language naturally. Where did that capacity come from? Robin Dunbar traces this to a time when our ancestors were forced into new territory due to climate change. Then they began living together in larger numbers.
The problem they have then is how do you bond these very big groups? Because monkeys and apes do this by grooming. Grooming really is a one-on-one activity, and it has an upper limit on the size of the group you can bond. We had to find ways of creating bonding with more individuals simultaneously to trigger the same pharmacological mechanism in the brain that is triggered by grooming, namely the endorphin system. And that went through 3 core stages. First, laughter, which works very well but has actually a surprisingly small group size, about 3 people, including the laugher. Remember, at this stage, laughter, it's not based on jokes. This is pre-language. It's based on slapstick, essentially.
So we're going from laughter to language, but is there anything in between?
Music, which essentially exploits the mechanisms that were used in laughter, which is basically voice control. So the third phase really comes very late in the course of human evolution with the appearance of language. The earliest it could occur is 500,000 years ago with the appearance of archaic humans. Fully modern language almost certainly didn't appear until the appearance of our own species, Homo sapiens, about 200,000 years ago or so.
Whatever the evolutionary story about where language comes from, what matters is what we do with language. I think it's very much bound up with what makes us human. I can talk to you now about things that you cannot see or hear, touch, taste or smell. I can take you beyond the present moment. In a way, language gives us mental time travel.
Storytelling is the core difference between us and all other species, I think. Our capacity to create in our minds this virtual world that we know doesn't actually exist out there. In other words, to be able to imagine alternatives. And that, of course, is the fundamental core to all those forms of storytelling that are central to human culture as we know it. So fictional storytelling and aspects of things like religion, that you can imagine a spirit world, as it were. And of course, in the end, science too, because to do science, we have to ask this question: could the world have been different? Why isn't the world different to the way it is now?
What we've been able to show with the jays is that they can imagine things based on past experiences of things that aren't visible to them anymore. But we can create whole fantasies of things that we've never seen and will never be able to. If we didn't have such a rich imagination system, perhaps we wouldn't need such a rich and diverse language. But the moment you have to convey all the emotional experience, for example, of being in love, or you're trying to explain the electromagnetic forces and the Higgs boson, you need a really complex imagination system, and that's really where our languages come into the fore.
Thought-provoking stuff. That was the History of Ideas podcast, brought to you by the lovely people at BBC Radio 4 and the Open University. And if that programme left your brain hungry for more ideas, you can listen to the whole series on the BBC iPlayer. You can also watch a whole host of brilliant short animations narrated by Harry Shearer, Gillian Anderson, and even yours truly, delving into the minds of some of the world's greatest thinkers. Find out about the golden ratio, perhaps, or whether we really have free will. Just search online for History of Ideas. See you next time.